Washington, the Supreme Court is hearing a new challenge to President Trump's travel ban. Justices must decide whether the president's campaign promise to enforce a Muslim ban influenced his executive order. Right now, travel restrictions are in place for 7 countries. The majority of those are predominantly Muslim. For more now, we want to bring in Eric Citron. He's a partner at the law firm Goldstein and Russell P.C. Did I say your last name right, Eric?
Yep, that's right.
Okay, good. So, Eric, how is the Supreme Court expected to rule on this? Will the justices favor the Trump administration and uphold it, or will they block the ban?
Well, I think it's going to be close, as many of the court's most controversial cases are. I think, you saw in the courtroom today, the liberal justices are lined up against the ban. The conservative justices seem to be leaning in favor of it. Justice Kennedy, as often is the case, is sort of in the middle. There are sort of 2 issues in the case. One is whether what President Trump did exceeded the power that Congress gave him, and the other is whether it's the travel ban discriminates against Islam. I think the first issue, the conservative justices seem much more likely to go with the president. On the second one, Justice Kennedy did seem a little bit skeptical, but not enough for anyone to feel comfortable that they're going to have his vote.
So part of the argument here is, how can this be a ban that discriminates against Muslims when North Korea and Venezuela is included?
Right. I think that's part of a hard question, and it relates to the question of whether the court is going to look behind just what's on the face of the ban and consider what President Trump was saying on the campaign trail before the ban was enacted. Justice Kagan asked a really interesting question in the courtroom today about if there had been a very anti-Semitic campaign and then a president enacted a travel ban on the state of Israel, there might be other reasons for the ban, but everybody would also have real suspicions about what was going on. And that was meant to draw out the question of whether the court can consider the nature of the campaign and think about what kind of message the ban was originally meant to send. So,
answer this. Does the argument of national security override discrimination usually when it comes to these courts?
I think what the court is sort of trying to figure out is what is going on with the ban. Is it really a national security issue, or is it in fact like discrimination masquerading as a national security issue? So I think if the court was persuaded that this was necessary or even appropriate for national security reasons, then I think that would, in a sense, overcome the argument about discrimination. But it would only be because the court was persuaded that it wasn't really for discriminatory reasons that the ban was enacted, if that makes sense.
It does. So the Trump administration has been struggling with this ban. They've been struggling with the ending of DACA. That's the other big court case that we're watching. How do these cases highlight the scope of the president's power over immigration? Does he have as much power as he either wishes or thinks he has?
Well, there's no question the executive branch has a lot of power over immigration, and Congress in part has given him a lot of that power. And that's one of the issues that was being discussed today, where I think the conservative justices did seem to be leaning in favor of presidential power. But as with all things, there are limits on what the president can do, and many of those limits are imposed by other aspects of the Constitution. Even if the president is allowed to exclude almost anyone he wants from the country, he also needs to make sure he doesn't violate the religion clauses and the anti-discrimination clauses in the Constitution. And I think the court is willing to stand up for those things.
Right. So which justices are you watching closely? We know that Justice Kennedy can be a bit of a toss-up. Which way do you see the justices going, particularly Kennedy?
Well, I think it's all about Justice Kennedy for the most part. In any universe in which the opponents of the travel ban win 5 votes, their 5th vote will be Justice Kennedy. Right. If they get somebody else, it's because they already have him. I think, Justice Kennedy is a real believer in religious freedom and pluralism. And I think if there's anything likely to push his buttons in this case, it's his sense that what's going on here is really some kind of discrimination against Muslims, including Muslims living in the United States who can't see their family members who have been barred from traveling to the United States under the ban. If he thinks that this is punishing Muslims or treating as Muslims as less than, I think his vote is much more in play.
So then if the Supreme Court rules in favor of the Trump administration, is that it? Is it a done deal? Or do you expect more legal challenges as we move forward?
Well, I think there'll be no end of legal challenges, and it depends a lot on what happens next. You know, this ban has been constantly evolving. I think there was some discussion today about whether there was going to be consistent review of the policy every 6 months or so. If the government has made that representation and then doesn't follow through on it, there might be more litigation on that point. And really, you can expect, I think, unending legal challenges of one kind or another. But if the court upholds the ban, I think the air will come out of a lot of those challenges. They're just much less likely to be successful, even at the initial stages, like this one was.
All right, Eric Citron, thank you so much for your insight.
Thanks for having me.